and welcome back to the Girl Gone London channel, where we create drama on the internet over all things American versus British. Today's topic is all about brands. You would think there'd be no difference here because a brand name is a brand name. Surely there is one way of saying it correctly, but oh no, there are often multiple ways people have come up with to say different brands across the globe, some more correct than others, so let's dive in. Now the first on my list is this shampoo and hair care brand. Listen for the way it's said in this British ad.
Pantene.
Now listen to this American ad.
You know it's Pantene.
Brits tend to say Pantene, and Americans say Pantene. Sometimes it's hard to tell what the actual pronunciation is supposed to be, but I'm going to make a judgment call for each of these based on some very brief research and a general gut feeling based on not very much. So for this one, Pantene technically originated in Switzerland in 1945, but really boomed when it was bought by an American company, Procter & Gamble. The British have never been a part of the company, so I'm going to go with the Americans' win on the pronunciation of this one. Next up is this brand, a sports brand. In the UK, typically people say Adidas, but in the US, we say Adidas. Who is right? Considering it's a German brand and the name is a derivative of the founder's name, Adidas is correct, and the Brits and Europeans have this one right. I will say though that it's important to note that typically advertising in each country will go with the pronunciation most popular in that country, as you've seen from the Pantene versus Pantene. So it's not like in the US we see commercials or adverts as they're known in the UK. We don't see commercials for Adidas and go around saying Adidas. We typically copy what the marketing says, and sometimes companies actually run with a different pronunciation for something if it sounds more exotic or fits better in the other culture. Next on our list is this brand. How would you say it? Rhyming with bike or rhyming with bikey? If you rhyme it with bike, you're likely British. Not everyone I've encountered in the UK says it this way, but it's a very popular pronunciation. In the US, we say almost without fail or exception, Nike. Now, the Americans have this one for two important reasons. Firstly, Nike is an American company founded in a place called Beaverton, Oregon. And if Beaverton is not the most American sounding town name you've ever heard, this company is very thoroughly USA based, so I feel like the Americans can choose the pronunciation on this one. But even more importantly, the name is based on a Greek goddess, and her name is Nike. She's the goddess of victory, and if you listen to the little Wikipedia sound icon next to her name, again, very official research being done here, it's pronounced Nike with no alternate options given. Let's move on to another one we can argue about because this one is slightly more confusing. This type of Kia car, listen to the way it's said in the UK.
The Kia Sportage.
Versus the USA.
Cover more ground in the Kia Sportage Turbo Hybrid.
You can hear that in the UK it's Sportage, like the Taj Mahal, and in the US it's Sportage, like the word edge. Kia is a Korean company, but I can only find conflicting statements on how they would say it. In this video from a Korean YouTuber, he says Sportage.
And the car I have behind me today is Kia Sportage.
But then other people online say that that's not how you say it in Korea, so we're at a loss as to who is correct. So for this one, we're gonna go with no one wins, they're just different, and clearly Kia lean into this difference in their ads. I did read something that said the aj sound sounds too fancy to Americans who would sound silly saying it that way in an American accent, which is a theory I can get behind. Still on the topic of cars, we have this one. Americans say Nissan. Brits tend to say Nissan. This is a Japanese car company, and this is an example I can find of how a Japanese person would say the brand name.
Nissan.
There are also threads online with people saying that the way the Americans say it is closer to the Japanese pronunciation and that the British pronunciation is out of left field, but then the Brits online argue that Nissan is how it is spelled and Nissan UK says Nissan in its adverts. So again, it's not like everyone is just choosing a random pronunciation that differs from the advertising in their home country. Who wins on this one? I don't know. You tell me. I've lost track of the points a little bit, and when it comes to car brand pronunciations, I feel like both countries struggle a little bit. Next up is going to have an obvious winner, and that is this brand. Americans tend to say Cadbury, like Cadbury, or Cadbury, like you're burying something. Brits typically say something closer to Cadbury, There isn't really room for discussion here on who is right. The Brits are right about their own brand. And while I can't actually find an example of the British pronunciation in an advert, because for some reason Cadbury doesn't actually say its name that much in their ads, they just use dancing gorillas that don't talk. You'll have to trust me on this one. So if you're British, you can argue amongst yourselves on maybe there's regional variations on how you would say this brand, but Americans, you are wrong when it comes to this British chocolate brand and how we typically pronounce it. Now to go back to the car examples, we have this brand. Traditionally, many Brits say Hyundai. And adverts from this company within the UK back this up, but the Americans say it differently, like Hyundai, as you can see here.
It's your journey. Hyundai.
Now, 1 year ago, this company's UK branch put out an ad that was specifically trying to get Brits to change the way they pronounce the name to be more in line with the global pronunciation. You can see from this clip that they now want them to say something different, Hyundai.
Hyundai, not Highland Eye.
Oh, it's Hyundai, by the way.
Hyundai. Search Hyundai.
It's the dawn of a new Hyundai.
The first comment on this video, rightfully so, points out that the ad makes fun of Brits for saying the name wrong, but doesn't address that the ads shown to them all of this time in the UK say it this way. If the actual pronunciation is Hyundai, then both the Brits were wrong with Hyundai and the Americans' Hyundai is also off. But I haven't seen an equivalent commercial for the US trying to change the name pronunciation in America, which I feel is unfair or perhaps points to the fact that they don't believe Americans are even capable of using a more sophisticated or authentic pronunciation. So now I feel like both Brits and the Americans should be offended on this one. Anyway, we've got two more on our list, the next being this very popular fast food chain. In the US, it's always McDonald's, emphasis on Mick. In the UK, I hear McDonald's a lot, not necessarily exclusively, but a lot. The company's name is based on the last name of its founders, Richard and Maurice McDonald, who are American. In the US, we say this last name as McDonald, so there isn't really much to argue over, but then it's also called a Big Mac, not a Big Mick, which then leads to the McDonald's theory. Also, sometimes this vowel sounds can be quite close to each other based on your accent, so when I say just the name of the restaurant, I easily say McDonald's, but when I'm saying Ronald last name, I tend to say Ronald McDonald, which is closer to McDonald's. Again, a lot of people in the UK do say McDonald's, which also becomes fun shortened nicknames like Mackey's, whereas in the US, our nickname for McDonald's is typically Mickey D's. And finally, this brand. In the US, we mostly say Nestle, but in the UK, in recent history, it tends to be said as Nestle. But if you go way back, even in the adverts, they call it Nestle.
Nestle's Milky Bar.
This is actually a Swiss company, and doing research, the most accurate answer I can find is that the current British one is correct. Nestle. The accent on the last E is what gives it away, changing the final sound into Nestle instead of Nestle. Or Nestle. Again, you'll find that the ads in different countries pronounce it differently, so people start arguing over the internet over which is right and using commercials or adverts to back themselves up, not realizing that just because the American commercial says it one way doesn't mean it's ultimately correct, though it is correct as to how it's said in that market. But to me, how the company says it themselves within their native country or language is always going to be the actual pronunciation, so America loses on this one. Now that brings me to the end of this video. I'm sure there's more that you've heard, so comment below on any brands you've heard pronounced differently between the US and the UK. As always, thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.